All right, I think we're live now. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Education USA India App Camp. My name is Astha Virk Singh. I'm the Senior Advisor at the Education USA Center based out of New Delhi. Today, we're going to be talking to you about unpacking the CSS profile, the ISFAA, and the FAFSA forms. And if this sounds like Greek to you, we will break it down to you in the session. Do not worry about that. But this session is primarily for undergraduate students and parents, so high schoolers who are going to be going to the US for their bachelor's program. And today we're going to be talking to you a little bit about the different sources of funding. How do you actually apply for financial aid? What are the determinants of financial aid? So who gets it, right? And how much? And eventually we will talk about the forms that are required to fill out to apply for the financial aid that you're seeking. Please remember, this is not a walkthrough session of the forms per se. We will be highlighting some key factors and aspects of the forms, but we're not going to go page by page of into each of the forms. If you do have any specific questions about a particular item, etc., you can ask us, or we can also take this conversation outside of this session after the session. But we're broadly going to be talking to you about financial aid policies and how to apply for financial aid at US universities, right? So with that, I want to just tell you a little bit about this application bootcamp that we have been doing since August 26th. Many of you have been joining us since the beginning, since August through till today. If you have missed any of these sessions and you are currently applying for fall 2022, please do check out these recorded sessions which on our Facebook page, which is Education USA India. Today is the concluding session of the app camp. And just a few things, we are starting very soon. Please mute your microphones. If you do have any questions for us, you can put them in the chat box and we will get those questions in towards the end of the session. We are also live streaming this session on Facebook, like I mentioned. So if you are joining us on Facebook, you can ask us your questions on Facebook. And my colleagues who are joining us today, we have Aparna from Chennai Center and Janet from the Ahmedabad Center, who are kindly supporting us through the session. They will be relaying these questions to me, and I will be asking our panelists these questions towards the end of the session. So that's how the session is going to work. Just a little bit about Education USA. If you are new to us, just a second, there's the doorbell. All right, I'll ignore that. Okay, so Education USA is your official source on US higher education. It is supported by the US government. Our mission or goal is really to provide students who are applying to the US with information which is accurate, current, and comprehensive, and most importantly, unbiased. Okay, we do not really represent any particular set of universities or do not have agreements or contracts with any universities. We are happy to help students to apply to any of the accredited institutions in the US. And that number, incidentally, is about 4,500 plus. Okay, so that's a lot of universities and colleges. But fret not, we're here to help you with that process as well. We are a huge network. We're present in 170 plus countries around the world, around 430 centers everywhere. 8 of those centers are in India, in 7 cities. And in different cities, we're hosted by different institutions. So you might hear USIEF, Yashna Trust, IAES, Y-Access Foundation. These are all hosts for Education USA in India, okay? But please remember, we're all Education USA, and the level of, the support, the kind of service that you'll get is across the board similar and same, okay? So with that introduction to Education USA, I also want to talk to you a little bit about our 5 steps. This process, I understand, can get a little overwhelming for students and parents, but we have divided this process into 5 steps, which takes students in a timely and organized manner through each of the components. So we help you with even shortlisting universities, how to apply for funding, how do I actually apply, and then eventually your student visa and your pre-departure. Okay, the student visa sessions are done by our consular officers or visa officers, the same officers who actually adjudicate your student visas. So you're hearing it again from the official sources. All right. Just a bit about our services. You can take a screenshot of this slide, but I'll also be uploading this in the chat box later on. Sign up with Education USA India. If you're applying to the US, you get a lot of information. We have a weekly calendar that goes out with scholarship alerts, session details, etc. You can call us up if that's your thing. Toll-free line is available. We also meet students for a one-on-one Ask an Advisor session virtually every day. You can check out the India calendar link to get the dates and the link for these sessions. We do organize a lot of specialized sessions just like this one with US universities. And we also have individual advising memberships in case you're interested in a more guided sort of advising where an advisor will kind of help you through the process, where you can contact our centers individually to know more about our memberships. Okay. We do have an exclusive Education USA India mobile app for Indian students. Download this app. It's very useful. You'll get notifications for various things. Many of those updates are scholarships, and then you can delete this app later once you're done with the process. But for now, it might be very, very useful for you to have this. This is our 24/7 advisor, our YouTube channel. It is, it's a gold mine of information. It has all our sessions that we have done recorded and uploaded for you. So if you are interested in looking at other sessions, other topics, please explore our YouTube channel as well, which is Education USA India. And this slide also you can take a screenshot of or a picture, and we'll upload this data also information in the chat box later on. But these are our 8 centers, and you can contact your nearest one. Of course, many of us are virtual at the moment, so we're meeting students from across India. But if you want more in-person services, maybe hopefully down the road, maybe next year, etc., please look up the center which is nearest to you. Right. So with that, I would like to introduce our amazing panelists today. And we have really selected, our institutions very carefully because the US is massive, right? There's a huge range of and diversity of institutions. So it's important for students to hear from different perspectives. And today's panelists are going to bring you just that, right? So I'd like to welcome Gail Holt. She is the Dean of Financial Aid at Amherst College. And we also have with us Marie Whalen. She is the Associate Director of International Admissions and Recruitment at Whitworth University. Gail and Marie, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time out. We are very, very excited to have you on board. And I'm sure this is going to be a great session. And we look forward to your insights and perspectives. And I think with that, we can dive into the session. We will begin with Gail, who will take us, explain the world of financial aid to us before we actually go into the CSS profile, the ISFAA, and the FAFSA forms. So over to you, Gail. Please let me know when you want me to change the next slide, and I'll do that for you.
Great. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be with all of you, so many of you, and I'm just, appreciative of technology that allows us to do sessions like this from so, far across the country, and certainly grateful for you to end your day joining us. I'm grateful that Marie is getting up so early as well to be part of this, but it's really neat how we can use technology to share this information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of an overview of financial aid before I hand it over to Marie. So we'll jump right in. The first thing that I think is important to know about and to consider is what type of admission policy. So there's admission policies and there's financial aid policies when you're applying to US college. So the admission policy may be a need blind, you may have heard that term, or a need aware policy. What that means is it's the relationship in considering an admission application. Are family finances considered or not considered? So in a need blind policy, the admission office is only looking at a student's academic credentials in order to be accepted. And financial aid is not a consideration at all. There's no discussion with the financial aid office, and students will be accepted on their academic merits. In a need-aware admission policy, institutions do need to consider the financial capabilities of a family as one component of an admission application. Usually those financial considerations are really just on the fringes. It's really for a smaller subset of students, but it's important to know what kind of policy, just so that you're aware when you're applying. I say that because if a school, is need blind, you want to not worry about the financial aid. Unfortunately, most of the colleges in the US do need to consider financial resources for, international students coming to the US because funds are so limited. You also want to be, another consideration when you're applying to colleges in the US is, how long might it take to receive a degree? So you want to ask or look at the statistics for a school. Are students graduating within 4 years? Or sometimes, do students, for a variety of reasons, do they need to take 5 years? But that's going to be important as you're considering your family resources and family budgeting, in terms of how much is the education going to cost. So a more expensive annual cost for an institution that really is graduating students in 4 years still may be less than a less expensive annual cost institution, but where students simply, for a variety of circumstances, aren't able to graduate in that 4 years and need to take 5 years. The other thing to consider is, what are the travel costs to the US, and how often will your student be returning home? Will it be during the year? Will it be once a year? Some colleges and universities will have opportunities for summer housing, but you'd want to know that. What are the costs associated with that summer housing? In terms of financial aid, some colleges will give consideration and kind of an allowance for travel each year. And some colleges and universities may only give an allowance for travel once in the 4 years. So that doesn't mean that students can't return home, but in terms of the overall picture of support and financial aid, that is something that you want to be aware of. So let's move on to the sources of financial aid. So as we then, I talked a little bit about the admission policies at the very beginning. Now I'm going to transition to talking about financial aid policies. So there are really kind of two main categories of ways that students can receive financial aid in the US. The first would be merit-based scholarships. So these are grant and gift money that does not need to be repaid, that is based on a student's academics, their talent. It could be various forms of talent. In addition to academics, there could be musical talent or athletic talent sometimes. But it's something that is based and offered to a student based on criteria that are not specifically financial. What's important to know about these merit-based scholarships is they're going to vary widely by school, because each school is going to have their priorities about why and how they want to distribute these merit-based funds. They can require a separate application, so you definitely want to be reviewing the admission materials to make sure that you are able to complete whatever is required. The admission application itself is sufficient to be considered for merit-based scholarships. And certainly understanding what the renewal requirements are is exceptionally important. So if that's an academic requirement, or if that's a participation requirement, you would want to know so that funding can continue. Another form of financial aid is need-based financial aid. And so colleges that are distributing need-based financial aid, that is being done specifically based on family financial circumstances. So it doesn't matter in that case how strong academically the student is, and what they may bring to the institution from those perspectives, but it's going to matter, and students are going to be assessed based on their family finances. That is going to vary by school resources. So the amount of need-based financial aid that's available for international students varies widely. From some institutions, it's very plentiful, and some institutions it's not. There is a formula that is used to determine kind of how an institution distributes those financial resources, and that formula, it will be the same for all the students that are applying to that institution, but that also could vary from school to school. And in those need-based resources, students could be awarded possibly loans, student employment at the institution, which is a way students can earn money during the year to use toward their personal expenses. That's a common resource, and then grants from the institution. So those are the funds that don't need to be repaid and are free money. Also, need-based financial aid, there's a renewable criteria, so that's awarded annually, and you may need to reapply from year to year for that. So we'll keep going on now. So when applying for financial aid, the timeline will start at the same time as the admission application. So what's really important is not to wait until you've received the admission decision to start applying for financial aid. You want to start applying for financial aid at the earliest time possible. So definitely check on the school websites for deadlines. It's really important to meet those deadlines and kind of know what they are. Know that these application forms will take some time to complete, and they will also take some time in processing. So, if you have questions along the way, really starting early allows enough time to maybe send an email or make a phone call if you're not sure how to answer all the questions. The application forms, the CSS profile is one of the more widely used application forms, and that's why Marie's here to talk about that in just a little bit. And there could be institutional applications. With those applications, if the CSS profile is a fee-based, so if there are financial reasons that is a barrier, then you can check in with the institution to find out if there are alternatives in filing that application. And then following up on those application forms, institutions may also ask for other documentation. So that could be income documentation. So you do want to have kind of most recently available, if there are tax forms that have been filed, have those on hand. It may be a letter from an employer that confirms what the annual compensation is. So you want to have that, or know what kind of things school will ask for. And there are a lot of terms, so we'll jump in next to kind of show you, or share with you some of the terms, and some of these things I've already started to talk about. But this is it's a kind of, if you're diving into this for the first time, there is a lot to know. So each college university is going to be using a cost of attendance, which is an annual amount that are both the direct costs to attend that institution in terms of tuition, housing, meals, but it also includes indirect items or non-billed items. And those items, in order to be a student in the US, you need to travel. So it will include travel costs. There are personal costs. There are book costs. So all of that cost in order to be a student is the cost of attendance. And then institutions are going to use that calculation for, in terms of need-based financial aid, to calculate a family contribution. So that's not, unfortunately, what you would offer to an institution to pay, but it is a specific calculation. And that's the assessment of an annual amount that a family, reasonably may be able to absorb over a long period of time, both for the parent and for the student. So there may be a calculation for each, and together they form the family contribution. I've talked a little bit about the need blind admission policy that doesn't consider any financial ability. Need aware does consider financial ability. So you just want to have an idea of what the perspective is of that institution so that your expectations about the decision are aligned accordingly. Institutions that are able to meet need, what that means is it doesn't mean that they're going to cover the full cost, but what it means is if you use that cost of attendance total figure, subtract from that the family contribution, then the difference is the eligibility for financial aid. So very rarely is a student receiving the whole cost, but the financial institutions that can meet financial need are putting together a financial aid package that meets that calculated need, so that demonstrated need. And families then should be planning to cover at least the family contribution, and sometimes they have to cover what else the institution can't cover. So some institutions can't meet the full need. So after they award their financial aid, anything that they're not able to fully cover is going to be the responsibility of the family. So then if we jump into applying for funding, the timeline, whoops, I already talked about that. So let's talk about how financial aid is determined on the next slide. So this is, what people always are concerned about, how is this information going to be utilized? So the assessment is heavily based on income. That's all forms of income that are coming into the household. In the US, sometimes those forms are taxable, sometimes they're non-taxable, and that may also be the case as well where in your situation. But basically any financial resource that's coming into the household to help support expenses. Also, assets are going to be considered. So that includes savings accounts. It can include, a home if you own a home, or if you own other real estate, or if there's a business or a farm. But anything that is going to add to a family's financial health, so that institutions can decide how exactly to allocate out their resources. When multiple siblings that are in US colleges are enrolled, then institutions are usually factoring that in as well. So what kind of questions should you ask an institution? It's always kind of nice to know, where you should be coming from in terms of perspective. But the first thing is, what kind of financial aid do you offer? Because if an institution only offers need-based aid, then talking about the academic merits of a student aren't going to change anything. You really want to be focused on how is your financial information going to be assessed. If an institution is not able to meet full need, then kind of who might not receive that full aid? How can you start to plan and expect and assess whether it's a good financial fit at that institution? If you're able to bring some outside funds in, if those are funds from the government or funds from another organization, how is that going to be incorporated into a financial aid award? It could, replace the grant that the institution has offered. So you just really, want to know what that is going to look like ahead of time. What's going to happen year to year? Should families expect that the financial aid will stay the same as the costs rise? Almost every US institution has an increase in cost each year. So what will happen? Will the financial aid increase along with those costs, or should families be expecting to pay more each year? Is there going to be an expectation that students contribute any amount toward their education, potentially from summer earnings? What if you can't, you're really struggling to meet what the institution is expecting in terms of cost? Can you appeal that information? Can you ask for reconsideration? Can you provide more information that might alter their decision? So these are all, questions that I encourage you to ask if they apply. And as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, what travel allowance are considered in that cost of attendance that I mentioned? Is it an annual travel allowance, or is it once in the student's 4 years? So when the award letters come, they can vary from school to school. So sometimes the amounts from school to school can vary, and that could be based on the resources that an institution has. And based on that total cost, that can then determine how much a family has to pay. So the family contribution is something that families are always going to have to pay. But if there's unmet need, then it will be the family contribution plus that unmet need. Sometimes the total on an award letter from school to school may look the same, but it's the type of financial aid that can vary. And so it's important to recognize there is that, you want to be focused on the grants and scholarships because those are free money. Student loans need to be repaid. And if there's an amount for a parent loan on an award letter, which hopefully there's not, but if that happens, you need to understand that that's not a guaranteed amount. It would be then they're just, showing you that that's a possibility of a resource, and you would need to go out and apply for a loan and, be willing to do that, and then also have the ability to repay it. But what you want to be focused on is what is the net price for each institution that a student is considering. So looking at that total cost minus grants and scholarships, which is the free money, equals what is ultimately going to need to be covered somehow from the family. So as you're assessing institutions, that's what you want to focus on. So I'm going to close my section with a little bit about funding policies at Amherst College. So what is distinctive about Amherst College is that Amherst is need blind for all applicants. That does include both domestic and international students, which, as I said, is quite rare. So no financial circumstances are part of an admission decision. Financial need is the only criteria that we use to determine financial aid. We do not have any merit money. So families will be supported. Families with low financial means will be supported with a financial aid package after their family contribution, and students are considered equally both domestic and international students. And so, it is a generous financial aid program at Amherst. In our packaging of financial aid, we do not use loans in that initial package. So that need that I mentioned is met with grants and a modest student employment amount. All students need to reapply for financial aid each year. So we do consider financial circumstances as they are occurring and as they change. So when circumstances are improving, families should expect there to be some change in the amount offered. And if circumstances are declining, then we will try to help support families. So I'm going to turn it over now to Marie to talk about the profile.
Thank you, Gail, for this comprehensive overview of the U.S. Financial aid process for international students. I'm going to take a deep dive, or really more of an overview of the CSS profile and the international student financial aid application. Next slide, please. So while US students use a form called the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, to apply for aid to US colleges and universities, that is really not an option for international students because the FAFSA includes potential for federal and state aid as well as loans that are not available to international students. Some US students, however, also submit the CSS profile. The CSS profile, fortunately, was designed in such a way that both US and international students can use it because it has options and modifications for both types of applicants. The International Student Financial Aid Application, or ISFAA, however, can only be submitted by international students for whom it's solely designed. Both the CSS profile and the ISFAA are administered through the College Board. And there are similarities with both applications as well as key differences that I'll discuss in following slides. The application you end up using will likely be decided by the individual college or university to which you apply. Depending on how many applications you submit, where you submit them, and the institutional financial aid policies, you could potentially end up submitting the CSS profile to some institutions and the ISFAA to others. The CSS profile is used by approximately 400 institutions in the United States, colleges and universities, the majority of which are private and many are more selective, though some public universities also use it. And also the CSS profile is typically used by institutions that offer significant need-based aid, as Gail mentioned. Many more institutions, however, accept the ISFAA. Some accept both. It's important to note that applying for aid through either of these applications does not guarantee that you will receive need-based aid, just as submitting an application for admission to a college or university doesn't guarantee admission. It depends on what the data shows. In this case, what the financial data of your family shows. Next slide, please. So the CSS profile is a multi-page online application that, like its domestic counterpart, the FAFSA, which it most closely resembles, asks for a lot of information about your family finances. One of the advantages of the CSS profile over the ISFAA is that you can add all financial data in your native currency, and the CSS profile software will convert it to US dollars upon submission. So you don't have to try to figure out what the US equivalent is to your native currency. Now, the extensive financial information that's required by the profile can seem intrusive sometimes to parents, as you likely view your finances and financial situation as private. However, it's important to keep in mind that colleges really need this information to determine financial aid eligibility, and that the ultimate goal is getting your daughter or son the aid they need that will make it possible for them to attend a specific university and successfully get their degree there. The US FAFSA and the ISFAA also ask many of the same questions that the CSS profile does. So, you know, the questions that you're seeing in the CSS profile, these are standard kinds of questions. I would also like to point out that if there are any families who are, you know, attending this webinar who are wondering if they should apply for aid, whether they might earn too much to qualify, for example, I would recommend applying. Given the high sticker price of colleges and universities in the US, with some costing more than $60,000, more than $70,000 even per year, even families who earn the equivalent of, say, $200,000 US dollars could qualify for need-based aid at some institutions. Now, the CSS profile, unlike the FAFSA, for example, considers details such as a family's medical expenses and schooling costs for siblings and cost of living in different states or countries that can really benefit a student in terms of, getting additional funding that they otherwise might not. Once the profile is submitted by an applicant, there is a special institutional need analysis software system that processes the information and analyzes it and then provides the individual college or university with the estimated student budget. That is the amount that the system believes a student and family can pay the specific college based on the student and family's unique financial circumstances. The downside, there is a cost to the profile. It's $25 for sending the information to the first college or university and $16 US for any subsequent additional schools that this information is sent to. So, if you are submitting the CSS profile to 10, 20 different colleges or universities, the costs can add up. So that's something to be aware of. Many colleges and universities do offer fee waiver options to students whose family circumstances show that they cannot afford that, or sometimes a student may be a refugee or an orphan, for example. But also asking for a fee waiver does not guarantee you will get one, and not all colleges and universities offer those. Next slide, please. So what are some common mistakes that students and families make on the profile? Keeping in mind that once you submit the profile, you can't go back in and change it. So if you do make any mistakes, it's really critical that you email the financial aid office at the colleges to which you've applied and detail the mistake you made and what the correct information should be, so they can note that with your application. So often students will send an email with an attachment of their application. I get those all the time to my email, even though I don't process the financial aid applications. Colleges can't use the application page that students submit, however. We, like all other colleges and universities that use the College Board CSS profile, do so in large part because of that need analysis software. We pay the College Board, to be able to use that process. And that software only works when the student submits the application. So you really do need to submit it. And I know the reason students sometimes send the application via email is they're trying to avoid paying the fee for sending the profile to schools. But just be aware that that doesn't actually work, and you'll be asked to submit the profile. Another important factor is be sure to correct or to click on the correct academic year. You will see if you go to the website, for signing in and creating your account, it will ask you, are you applying for this academic year or that academic year? So if you are applying for fall 2022, for example, you must submit the application for the 2022-2023 academic year, not the 2021-22 academic year, because that only goes through spring of 2022. If you submit for the wrong academic year, you will be asked by colleges and universities to submit a new profile, and you'll have to go through that process again. So be certain that you have picked the correct academic year. A really common problem that occurs is when students use different permutations of their names for different applications. So, they may use, I'm just going to throw a very American name in there, John Smith Park, okay, on their application for admission, but then they use just John Park in their CSS profile, or John Smith. If the name on your CSS profile and the name on your application for admission do not match, it will be very difficult to connect those applications to one another. And the financial aid office will not think that you have submitted that. It's really important in all of your documents that names match. Ideally, you will use the same name on all of your documents that you use on your passport, which is also the name that would be used on your Form I-20 to obtain a visa. But the key thing is to make sure that there is consistency among the names on the applications. Another common mistake is entering the birth date incorrectly. Make sure you're using the correct format. In the US, we use month, day, year, whereas in most other countries, it's day, month, year. And so if you have used the incorrect format, again, it will not connect the CSS profile to your application because it will think that you are a different student. So before you hit submit on the profile or any other application, make sure that your name and birth date are correct. Another common mistake is entering your wrong status, domestic versus international. We typically see this with international students who are studying at a US high school or college. They think that it's a domestic application because they're already physically present in the US. But even though a student may be physically located in Seattle or LA versus Delhi or Mumbai, you are considered an international student, and your application should always be designated as international versus domestic. Also, make sure that you and your parents are completing the correct sections. There are specific sections for the student information, specific sections for the parent information. And if you switch those around, it can really affect the data and what ends up happening in terms of need analysis for your applications. Now, deadlines in the US college application process can be pretty strict and inflexible. Some colleges are more flexible if a student doesn't submit their application on time, whether it's for admission or scholarships or financial aid, but many are not. So, if your applications need to be in by 11:59 p.m. on, January 1st, do not submit them at 12:01 on January 2nd, because you could lose out on your ability to get any financial aid or to be considered for admission at a college or university. So, Gail mentioned the importance of deadlines. I just really want to stress that further. And that's also why it's important to start the process early. Now, if you or your family has a special circumstance that is impacting you financially at the time you're applying, but which isn't really apparent anywhere else on the profile, this is a section where you can explain that, and you should really take advantage of that. For example, if your family earned $75,000 in US dollars equivalent last year, for example, but a parent recently had a life-threatening accident that will require multiple surgeries and cost many thousands of dollars, please let the financial aid office know, because this will impact your finances and what you are able to pay. Because the other information on the profile may indicate that you can pay X amount, but due to new and emergent circumstances, that is not the case. So reach out, communicate, put the information on the profile, follow up if need be with the admissions office if you have, or a financial aid office if you have questions about how that will be viewed by them. Now, the final mistake may seem like a slightly odd one. Why would you intentionally provide incorrect information on the profile? And I mention it only because, we've seen this occasionally where students underreport or overreport the financial resources that they have available. And we know students are doing it for specific reasons. Sometimes students read or hear about from a friend, or maybe a counselor or agent they're working with, though certainly not from an EducationUSA advisor, that their chances of admission to a specific university will be lower if they show that they need a lot of aid. So they kind of panic and they indicate that they can pay more than in fact they can. Or sometimes students, worry that they won't get enough financial aid, so they may underreport resources that they have available. The problem is, even though students who do this are doing so because they're just really desperate to get into that college or university they want and to be able to afford it, the problem is colleges often verify financial documents. So if there's a discrepancy, they'll find it and it'll be a problem for you. You will still need to produce recent updated bank statements in order to obtain the Form I-20 for visas, for example. And if you're showing tax return documents, that will also show information. So it's really important that you just accurately state the resources you have available. If you're a high-need student applying to need-aware institutions, yes, that may in fact, affect your ability to get in, but it doesn't mean you won't be admitted. If you, are a student who has, resources to pay at least some of the cost of the colleges to which you're applying, that doesn't mean you won't get financial aid. As I mentioned earlier, even families earning what is a high amount, even in the US, of $200,000 or more, may still qualify for some aid to really expensive colleges or universities. So, give accurate information. If you have concerns, reach out to your admissions counselor as well as the financial aid office. And, if you have chosen your institutions wisely, ones that are a good potential academic and financial fit, you will find one that works for you. Next page, please. Okay, so what documents are needed for the CSS profile? I won't spend too much time on this. Gail also mentioned some of the documents that are needed. Again, up-to-date bank statements. I will say that up-to-date part is important. Sometimes students submit bank statements to us and they are a year old, or I've seen ones that, they're even 2 years old. And those will not be accepted. Usually schools have a date in mind in terms of how recent bank statements must be, maybe they must be no older than 2 or 3 months or 6 months. So be prepared to provide up-to-date bank statements, and any savings and investments accounts you have, tax documents, income statements. And again, you may, as Gail mentioned, be asked to provide a letter from your employer verifying employment and income and mortgage information that you have. Next slide, please. So the section on the ISFAA is a little bit shorter than the profile, simply because there are a lot of questions that are asked on the ISFAA that are very similar to what is asked on the CSS profile. However, the ISFAA is specifically for international students only. So if you are a US citizen, or say a dual US and Indian citizen, or dual US citizen and passport holder of another country, you will always be considered a US citizen, and you must apply for admission and financial aid as a US citizen. This is also something you want to do, as the aid options are so much greater often for US citizens and permanent residents. So if we do have any US citizens or dual citizens here, you may indeed fill out the CSS profile, but you may not submit the ISFAA. The ISFAA does have the advantage of being free. Students can send it to as many institutions as they want without cost, so there's no need to ask for a fee waiver. The disadvantages include the fact that all information, all the financial information that you put on the form is information that you need to convert into US dollars yourself. There's no nice tech software to convert that amount for you. On the college side, we don't have the software to provide the need analysis as there is for the CSS profile. We have to, do that ourselves, or the financial aid office does. I don't have to. The ISFAA is also, as mentioned, not accepted by all colleges and universities, especially some of the more select ones. They will require you to submit the CSS profile, with the exception of the fact that there are a few countries where the CSS profile cannot process payments. So for the students in those countries, they will be allowed to submit the ISFAA. So moving on to the funding policies for Whitworth University. We are need blind for admission for both international and domestic students, just as Amherst College is. Our aid, however, is not solely need-based. We offer merit scholarships that include both academic and talents and honor scholarships, as well as need-based aid. So many of our students, our international students, obtain a combination of different financial aid options from the university. They'll obtain scholarships and need-based aid often. Plus, we also give a partial housing grant to all admitted students who enroll. Our academic undergraduate scholarships are awarded automatically. Students don't need to apply separately for those, though they do for talent scholarships, because those are competitive in nature. For need-based aid, students must submit the CSS profile. We do not accept the ISFAA. We did in the past, but we found the profile to really be more helpful to us in accurately assessing student need. to also help students, because we do not guarantee to meet 100% of demonstrated need. We also have a lot of on-campus part-time job opportunities. And because we're located in Washington State, which has the second highest minimum wage rate in the US, students earn quite a lot of money per hour. It's $14 per hour. And so with the combination of aid and work, we have students from a variety of socioeconomic circumstances who are all able to afford their education at Whitworth. Thank you. And moving on to my colleague Gail again, she will talk in detail about the FAFSA.
All right, we know that this doesn't apply always to everybody, but we do want to touch for those that it does apply to. US citizens and eligible non-citizens are eligible and should complete the federal, the free application for federal student aid, also called the FAFSA. And the FAFSA is what is used by institutions to determine the distribution of eligibility for federal, US federal-based funding. And that comes in three forms. So there are federal grants to those US citizens. Those grants are really targeted toward the lowest income families. So they are, modest in means. They go up to about $6,000, per year in that range. And on a U.S. income level, it's targeted to families usually that are making less than $50,000 in U.S. dollars per year. So the federal grants usually are not going to cover, anywhere near the cost for a student attending a U.S. college, but they are one portion of resources that are usually complemented and supplemented by institutional funds. The institutional funds are usually the largest part of what students are receiving to help fund their education. There are federal work study funds, and some institutions also have their own institutional funds, but from a federal perspective, federal work study is basically an allowance. It's an amount that's set aside for a student and is a resource, and students would get a job on campus, and then they would work on campus, and then they would earn an hourly wage on campus, and the money that they receive is generally there to be used for their personal expenses. So it's not an amount of money that's crediting toward the bill, and it is just a resource for students to use. So in this context, that could be a federal amount, but some institutions may also have a similar program using their own funding. There are also federal loans that can be offered to federally eligible students, again, mostly US residents, and those federal loans would be in the students' names. There are parent loan options as well. The student loans, though, are limited and capped each year. So that can range from $3,500 to, $7,500 in that range per year. So that also is not going to cover the full cost, annual cost of an education, but it is one component. So what does the FAFSA look for? The FAFSA is very similar to information that's going to be on the profile, but general information needs to be collected so that it can be determined if the student is actually eligible to complete the FAFSA. It is an annual application, just like the profile that needs to be filed each year. And just like the profile, you'd list all the colleges that you want this information to be sent to. So you're only filling it out once and then distributing it to those colleges. The distinction with the profile is the FAFSA, because it's a federal form, is free. Parent information is included on the FAFSA, and it's possible that students are US citizens, but the parents are not. And that's that's totally fine. It's the student that needs to be eligible to file the FAFSA and needs to be either a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So all legal parents of a student who live together, whether they're married or not, will be reporting their information on the FAFSA. But if parents are divorced or separated, it's only the custodial parent and their spouse that are listed and reporting information as parents. And if a student has a legal guardian, that is not considered a parent. But also the household information is also reported on the FAFSA, similarly to the profile, how many people live in the household and how many students are attending a US college. So we'll go on to what kind of additional information. So then, much like the profile, there's financial information. In terms of what financial information, the income information on both the profile and the FAFSA for parents and students is going to be the 2020 income for the coming 22-23 academic year. So students that are applying now for next academic year will be using income from 2020. And as I started with, that's going to be both taxable as well as untaxed income in the form of the way this information is asked for. And both parent and students assets, again, are also part of the consideration. But unlike the profile, the FAFSA does not include a primary home. Along with the profile, it does not include any value of qualified retirement accounts or life insurance. And families that own their own small business, that would not be reported on the FAFSA. That is reported on the profile. And consumer debt is not considered on the FAFSA, but if there is debt specifically on assets that are being reported, then that would be considered. So when we get into the common mistakes, they're really very similar to what Marie mentioned in terms of the information being in the wrong place. Oftentimes the switching parent and student information, and that's something you don't want to do, because if you report parent income information in the student section, that's going to make it look like there's a whole lot less need usually than is probably the case. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the questions carefully and responding to who the information is being asked for. And when, just remember that the application is actually the student's application. So when the application is asking for your information, that usually is referring to the student, but the applications have gotten better and become more specific in labeling there and kind of specifying student versus parents. But oftentimes, sometimes families that are contributing to a retirement plan, sometimes that's overlooked. It's important to always review the information before you submit it. I have seen families that have included cents in their reporting of a figure when it should just be whole dollars. And so that when families do that, it adds a whole lot more digits and it makes a smaller number look like a much bigger number. And so you want to make sure that you understand the question and that the dollars you've put there are correct. So those are just a few common mistakes. In terms of documents that are required for the FAFSA, the FAFSA itself is the main application, but it is not the single kind of start and stop. Colleges and universities are required to verify data that's on that application, and some students are selected for a process called verification. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong or that there's a problem. It just means that institutions need to ask for some additional information. Much, as we said, it could be, tax documents. That could be a tax return. They could be asking for a worksheet that confirms the family members and who's in college, or they could be asking for asset information. And as Marie pointed out, this whole process can feel very intrusive. But it's really, it's designed to make sure that students do have access to the resources that they need to attend higher education. And because resources are limited, it's really important that colleges are able to do this in an equitable way that tries as best as possible to distinguish families' financial ability. Really being very attentive to communications from colleges is really important. So colleges have portals that they post information, they email students. So make sure there's good communication with the family about who's receiving and who's checking the email so that you can be responsive if a college has questions. Looking at that correspondence and making sure that when you're looking at the portal that everything is reflecting what you intend it to be in terms of completeness. So I think that we're going to head into our question and answer section. And I can tell by some of the chat in there that you have a lot of good questions. So this is the exciting portion, and we will be happy to kind of start some of the questions, but I'll take the lead on how we proceed from here from our hosts. I know that one of the questions.
So you need to unmute yourself, please. Janet, as a host, you'll need to unmute us.
Got it. She's unmuted me. Yeah, sorry. Right. So great. Thank you so much. I actually had a list of frequently asked questions prepared just in case you didn't get any, but I was very, very wrong. We have quite a few questions and I think I'll just get into those. Just scrolling up on my phone. I'm not distracted by my phone, guys. I'm just trying to get the questions. My lovely friends Aparna and Janet have put in all on WhatsApp for us. Okay, so Gail and Marie, thank you so much for this amazing, overview. I've learned so much today, and I think we'll have more answers coming in. So the first question is, in the CSS profile, it is suggested not to include any special characters in phone numbers. So then for the Indian context, should we start with the 91 and then just complete our phone number? Because we cannot add a plus or a bracket and such.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Heba, I think that answers your questions. Please do not put any special characters. Just start with the 91 and then go into your number. They also know that you're an Indian, the application is coming from India. So I'm sure that they can put 2 and 2 together as well. Okay. The next question. If a US citizen staying in India, how do they fill up the FAFSA or the CSS as they don't pay federal taxes? They get foreign tax credit for taxes paid in India, and India is at a higher tax bracket, so they don't pay federal tax. So basically, if a US citizen is staying in India, how do they fill out this FAFSA or the CSS if they're not paying any federal taxes? Who would like to take this question?
So you just answer 0 to that. I think what's important is just making sure the institution on the institutional application side has all the information, because we would want to know what taxes are being paid in India and what that income is. But on the FAFSA, you would answer that based on really, there is an opportunity though to also report that there's a foreign tax form filed, so you can add those 2 together.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. How early should we start applying for financial aid? And somebody asked a question on grants that has already been answered during the session. So how early should one start applying for financial aid?
I say as early as possible. The FAFSA and the profile applications both open up. They did open up on October 1st. So that does not mean you're late. You are right on time. The session is offered at a perfect time. So I would say that starting, this month, if you can start the applications would be great, because you do want to kind of see how the questions are answered and be comfortable. You don't want to be rushing So I would say if you start them this month, next month, most admission applications start to be due in November and December. So.
And I would just add to that. I myself have submitted the CSS profile for one of my kids. And, it really is a process, and there's, gathering all the information and obtaining bank statements and making sure everything's up to date. I spend days working on this application. So, really cannot stress enough how important it is to start early. And I know depending on, specific countries, sometimes it takes time for families to get information from their banks. So you do not want to rush this process and risk making unnecessary errors.
Yeah, that's very good advice, both Gail and Marie. Thank you for letting us know. A lot of students wait till the last moment to kind of get started on this. So absolutely. Do we need to provide financial proof at the stage of the application or only at the visa stage? And would this obviously differ for somebody who's applying for financial aid because you would be submitting your documentation, etc. during that time. But otherwise, for an application, do you have to provide proof of finances with the application or at the visa stage? Who would like to take this on?
It's usually, it would be usually at the time of the application following that. So you'd submit the application, and then the college university is going to follow up with what the next steps are. So some colleges may want you to send that information directly to them. Some colleges may have an alternative process to upload those documents. But the visa and the certification of finances form will come later.
Right. Okay. So, Marie, if you can take this one. Are there more grants available for US citizens finishing high school in India? So generally, grants, are they more available to domestic students or US citizens or international students?
Well, it really depends on what the grant is. Federal or state grants, obviously, those are available to domestic students wherever they are based. That's why, a domestic US student who's located in Delhi or Iceland, for that matter, would be submitting the FAFSA and would be eligible for the same kinds of, federal grants. In terms of grants from institutions themselves, that would be the same process. A student wouldn't be advantaged or disadvantaged if they are a US citizen based on where they are located.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. So we have this very specific question. I'm just going to break it down. It's a little long, but basically one parent of a student has lived there working with the state government, one of our state governments, and they have traveled to other states on deputation, which is a very common thing here in India. Now, his total service is of 25 years, but in one state he worked for 15 and the other state he worked for 10 years. Now, what should be the answer on number of years at current place? So would this be the latest place that they're living at? And can they give more details in the additional information or special circumstances section? How would we approach this?
I wouldn't spend a ton of time worrying too much about that. I would report it just as your most recent employment, but that's not a critical part of the application. But absolutely, anytime a family has any concerns that they think the application doesn't fully collect information that they want, the profile application does allow for the special circumstances, and anything that you think is instrumental in sharing about ability to pay for college should be shared.
Right. Absolutely.
Agreed. Yeah.
Mary, agree with that?
I do. It will be the most recent place of employment or living that should be reported.
All right. So we have a question on retirement plans. So in the parent section, under the retirement plans, it says that, check all that applies. There are quite a few options. Now, this parent works in the state government in the civil services and has, service of a few years, and the other parent is a homemaker. Now, when they mark it as civil service, when they tick one, it kind of gives them the type of retirement plans, and those are quite a few. But in a state government service, these retirement plans are not demarcated like this. So in that case, should you write 0, or should you again explain this elsewhere? Because it wouldn't apply to them.
Yeah, you should explain this because, colleges want to know if there is a retirement plan and how much that involves. So you definitely should not put 0 in because that would be inaccurate.
Right. Okay. So if one of the parents is a homemaker, parent employment, under parent employment, should you write retired or not employed or unemployed, employed by choice or unemployed? Would that be unemployed then? If a parent is not working? I mean, that's, yeah, it's, I mean, no negative connotation there to unemployment. Okay. What documents would I need if my mom is a single parent? Would those be the same documents as any other parent? Right. So we've spoken about the documents that are required during the application. That does not matter if you're if a parent is a single parent or not. The same documents would apply. Okay.
Yes.
Right. I'm just going through, there's some repeats as well. So I'm just trying to see if I can club some of them together. Right. So we did speak about summer earnings, and Kriti is asking, what exactly are summer earnings?
Yes, so students who work maybe during the summer in the US, students can work in part-time jobs and earn sort of money in the US for work, done during the summer. Sometimes that's on campus if students are staying, or if they're eligible to work in the US, then they may be earning money elsewhere. But some institutions do require that students contribute to their educational costs. And one way a student can contribute to their educational costs is by using, by working during periods that are not academic periods and saving some of that money.
Right. All right. Fine. We'll move on to the next one. Now, in again, retirement savings, do we need to declare the cumulative value of retirement savings like the PPF or the Employment Provident Fund in the CSS profile? Do we kind of club it together and declare the value?
Yeah, what's important about the retirement questions, there are two questions. There's sort of the cumulative, what is saved in retirement, and that's not part of the calculation per se, but it is important to distinguish so that we're clear families are reporting things accurately, that is the cumulative savings. There's another question that if you're adding to retirement from your current income in that current year that's asking for income, that's a separate question. That's usually a smaller value of an amount that you're contributing on an annual basis versus the cumulative amount that's already there. So those are two separate questions. You want to make sure that you answer them accurately, separately. And so that's what's being asked for there.
Right. Thanks, Gail. Okay, now we have a few questions about the year of taxation and the application basically. So if the student is applying for fall 2022, they should be using the CSS profile, which is 2022, 2023 or 2021, 2022? The 2022, 2023?
23, yes.
Yeah, we mentioned that in the presentation as well, yes. So I think that's clear. So would ISFAA be used for student holding US citizenship? No, it's only for international students, correct?
The ISFAA, you said?
Yes, ISFAA.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And again, just to stress that if there are dual citizens out there, we sometimes have students who say, can I apply as an international student on my, Indian or Dubai, UAE passport, because they think it might advantage them in some way. But the answer is, from the US immigration perspective, if you hold US citizenship, you could hold 3 other citizenships. It wouldn't matter. You are a US citizen and you would not be able to submit the ISFAA, but you can't submit the CSS profile college with that.
Right, absolutely. So one of my students as well, last year, she is a US citizen, but she applied using both FAFSA and the CSS profile. So those two were available to her, but ISFAA was not. Right, okay. Now there's a common understanding about financial aid, right? That a lot of counselors and advisors in India also think that need-blind applications, especially for tier 1 city students at top US universities, guarantees rejection. And there's a similar question that in case I'm applying for financial aid through either of these forms, FAFSA, ISFAA, CSS, it will reduce my admission chances. So is it a myth? Is it true? Can you please both give your insights?
Yeah, I guess I hope I understood the question correctly. Need blind admission absolutely is a great thing. And it does not, so students should be confident in what they are presenting in terms of their academic credentials to that institution. And certainly there are some institutions that are very, very competitive academically, and it may be hard to get in, but I think it's worth saying students should present their best self and their best academics and try to apply to a variety of institutions that meet that are a good match, and that is what is the most important. Something will work out the way it's supposed to. But in terms of financial aid, students should present the financial aid that based on what they need. If families are in a position to be able to pay the full cost for 4 years or more of an education, then they should present that. But if you need financial aid to make a US education possible, you should apply for financial aid at the time of the admission application as well. And those are separate processes. So it is not worth it for any student to try to advantage themselves during that process, because we don't want any student to come to campus and not have the resources to stay. And it's highly unlikely that the offer of financial aid is going to change dramatically if that information was not presented up front. So please share your honesty with us. We will share as much as we can on the back end, because we really want this to be an important relationship. But I promise that if an institution is accepting a student and the institution is either pledging to meet full need or just pledging, this is the aid we can offer, they're going to do that and follow through on that commitment. Marie.
Right.
Yeah, Marie.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Whether you're applying to institutions that are need blind or need aware, it's important to understand that at both kinds of institutions, there are students who are admitted who have very high need, and they are able at their institution to get the aid that they need. Yes, at very highly selective institutions, it's going to be tough to get admitted, but the important thing is to pick institutions for which you have the requirements, at least the minimum requirements, to be considered for admission. Your financial circumstances, if you are a talented student that an institution really wants and they have the available funding, they will give it to you. But as Gail mentioned, and as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that accuracy of information is important because every institution has limits on the amount of financial aid funds that they can give. And if you don't submit an application for aid and you need aid, then, if you are admitted and then say, oh, by the way, I need, $10,000 or $15,000 a year to be able to attend, you are not going to get that funding. I can almost guarantee that, because all of the aid that is available for that year has already been distributed to the students who did submit those applications. So, you know, don't try to game the system or take advantage of the system. You know, all of us who are working in admissions and financial aid, we're, you know, professionals at this. We know, you know, the kinds of things that we need from students. We've experienced students trying to advantage themselves, and it just does not work. Be honest. Let's colleges know what you need. Apply to a good variety of institutions, including ones where you know you are most likely going to be able to get in and get the funding you need, or the cost is one that you can afford. There is a good college or university out there in the US for everyone. We have almost 4,000 institutions. So you know, work with your EducationUSA advisor. They are really experts. They are going to work for your benefit. They are student-centered, and they will give you some good ideas about institutions that are good for you.
Thanks, Marie and Gail. I think that's a very important message because we get this a lot, right? Year after year. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. I'm going to try and get a few more. Is it okay if we go a little overboard and stay back for just a few more questions? But students, if you haven't answered them, you can get in touch with us and we'll do that, okay? How do I fill up the CSS profile if I have incomes or savings in multiple countries? So would that be, in which currency would that kind of go in? And how do I kind of demonstrate that if I have them in two different countries?
I think the countries don't matter. I mean, it's reporting the income. Colleges don't really care where the income or the accounts are located. They just want to know what resources that you have available.
All right, thank you, Marie. Now, right, so I think some of the questions that we've already answered, I'm not going to be repeating them. I'm just moving on. What documents are required for the assets owned by parents in India? And what if they have loans on the house or property? So I think we mentioned that if they have any sort of loan, etc., on the declared assets, they should mention that. But other than that, the documents that Marie and Gail spoke about during the presentation is what you'll require. We are going to post some resources in the chat box as well, which have a detailed list of all the documents that are acceptable. But you can also check with the university or the university's websites on what they will accept. Okay, so I think I'm just going to move on because we've answered this. Okay. Right. Okay. We have a little bit on status. Okay. So if a US citizen is living in India, they can, their status of application will be domestic, or will it be international? A US citizen living in India.
On the profile application, it will be international, but they will fill out also the FAFSA application. And on the FAFSA application, there's no designation. I guess there is a designation on where you live and the tax form.
Right. So similar questions coming in. US citizens living in India will apply as international students, but then you also have access to applying for FAFSA. Okay. Right. I've taken those. There were 2 or 3 of those. Right. Okay. Just a few more. 1 second. Okay, what if you want to send your FAFSA information to more than 10 universities? At the moment, there's a cap on 10, but if I have to apply to more, then what do I do? Gail, I can see you nodding your head, so maybe
that's a good question. That's a good question. You can, you want to make sure that those 10 are submitted, and after that's processed, so it only takes a few days for that to happen. Then you can go back in to the FAFSA application and you can revise, so you can take schools off and you can add new schools.
Right, absolutely. And we get this every year again. Okay, so we have a question from Dia. Dia, this is a very specific question to your child, I think, about admissions, etc., medical education. We'll put in our email address. If you could just write into us, we can have a conversation about this. I'm not going to ask this question during the session because it's more about admissions. Okay, just scrolling down, just bear with me. Okay. Right. Okay, at what value does the property get reported as market value can differ? So at what rate should we, declare the property that we have?
It would be reported at the, what do you mean by the rate? I mean, the fair market value.
Yeah, so
it would be the current fair market value, and then also is asked as any debt that is owed to against that property.
Right. Okay.
Asta?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Gail. Okay, so I think, Marie, you mentioned the minimum wage in Washington State. Now, there's a question coming in that also out, maybe the urban cities, but if you move out into suburban or rural areas in the US, what does the minimum wage really differ considerably? And do you have like an estimate of how much that would be?
Right. So minimum wage rates are determined by each state. Each state has their own minimum wage rate in the US. It doesn't break down into rural versus urban areas. So if you're in Washington State, or you're in Mississippi and the minimum wage rate is X amount, then it is going to be that same amount, whether you're living in Seattle or our very tiny town of Sprague, Washington, which has a few hundred residents. It's going to be the same for all places of business. Also, colleges and universities, they can set their own, wage rate for student employment, which could be more than the minimum wage rate. So, in Washington State, it's $13.69 per hour, and we do pay some students that, but some of our more experienced student workers will get $14 per hour. So this is actually an important question, because especially for students who, are planning and need to work part-time for up to 20 hours per week during the academic year that's allowed for international F1 and J1 visa holders, where you live can make a huge difference. Some states have a really low minimum wage rate. It's like $7.50, $7.80 per hour, and others have, like Washington State and California, have really high minimum wage rates. So, students can earn almost twice as much in one state as they can in another. And that makes a significant difference for students where, every penny counts that they earn.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so Gail, you mentioned something about eligible non-citizens with respect to FAFSA. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, usually permanent residents in the United States. So that's probably not applying so much to folks who are living in India at the time who are US citizens, because there's just some different criteria, but usually those are folks who are living in the US.
Right. Okay. Is all financial aid renewable every year? Is it something that we can assume?
No, not assume that. It's one of the things that when I do financial aid webinars that I always stress is the importance of reading the fine print on award letters. Some aid is renewable, some aid may not be. Some institutions also engage in a practice that we not so lovingly call front loading, where They offer a very, they may offer a very good financial aid package the first year, but then students may find the second year, if they haven't read that fine print, suddenly they have $5,000 less per year because some aid is not renewable. So, it's really important to check that. And if you are not certain if all aid is renewable, then please email the financial aid office and ask that question and get the information, the response back in writing. I know for our university, we make it very clear. We have an award letter, and we also have, and it's all online as well as on the printable letter, and it states specifically, that all aid is renewable, except, for example, we have like a one-time $1,000 virtual visit scholarship that we're offering now, or we have like a $3,000 partial housing grant that's renewable through the 4 years as long as the student continues to live on campus. But all other aid is renewable as long as students maintain a certain minimum GPA, which is a very common requirement at colleges and universities. You need to, if the university is providing funding for you, the expectation is that you will, provide them with your best effort and attend your classes and do good work and maintain that minimum GPA to qualify for that. So in a sense, all aid is conditional upon students doing their part as students to do well in classes, but also some aid may not be renewable, or sometimes I see that, the student's aid, a university may replace like one grant with another. It doesn't make the grant go down. It just changes the source of funding. This is really an important question, and really important for students to make sure they understand all the requirements of their award and what it and how.
All right, thank you, Marie. I think we have time for just 2 or 3 more questions. We have way too many questions. I can this just list is coming in, but I'm going to ask the next one. So in the CSS profile, assets and bank statements are combined for both parents. So the assets and I think the savings is combined for both parents, but the income is shown individually, or would it? Is that correct, Gail? And Marie, you're nodding your head. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. If you're applying to a need blind institution in early action, then do we need to submit the CSS profile before submitting our application?
Yes. So yes, you want to apply for financial aid before you hear about the admission decision, because our goal is that when we admit students, we want to present the good news of the admission along with the good news of the financial aid.
Right. Okay. All right. Now we have a question. My mother is self-employed, but she doesn't earn enough to pay taxes. So she doesn't make it to that income tax slab. Which official documents can she use?
Yeah, so whatever is available. If there are bank statements that reflect what the income is, that could be helpful. It's obviously a little bit harder when there's not an employer that can provide a letter to attest to the income. Marie, do you have other suggestions beyond?
Yeah, I was just going to say the tax returns. This is the only real way to, or back, not tax returns, I'm sorry. It's still early in Washington State. The bank statements are what you want, because that should show, if you can have a year's worth of bank statements, that should show how the situation is working.
Right, thank you. Okay, we have this question and we get this again very often. So in the CSS profile, it's asking how much funding will be contributed by parents. What is the suggested value to be indicated? 50%, 60%? How does one decide this? Is there a formula to kind of get at this number?
Yeah, I wouldn't stress too much about that question. The intent is really, what does the family think they can reasonably contribute per year? So that's not a 4-year figure, that's a 1-year figure. And what are you thinking that you as a family could directly pay to educational costs?
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that it will be that amount, but go ahead.
Yeah, at the same time, it's important to point out that what families think they can pay per year and what the CSS profile or FAFSA believes a family can pay per year may not be the same thing. They should ideally be close, but sometimes parents have very different expectations about what they think they should have to pay. We've seen applications where the family has assets of many hundreds of thousands of dollars in the banks, but they believe they should get a quote unquote full ride, that the university should pay for it all. So sometimes, expectations are unrealistic. Sometimes they are very close. They're pretty accurate, and parents looking at their financial situation understand how much they can pay. And other times they think they can pay more than we know they can pay. So just to keep expectations in check and realize when you see the EFC, that it may not be what you were expecting as a parent.
Okay, so I think I'm going to take 2 questions because we're very much over time. So as a US citizen living abroad, due to foreign income exclusion, what income shall we report for FAFSA as well as the CSS profile?
All of the income that is being received in the household. So I hope that's helpful on both the FAFSA and the profile.
Right, okay. And we have another question on, sorry, there's so many. Okay, if my dad is the only earning member and stays in Canada as a refugee, but mom and family live in India, how should I go about submitting documents and information on these financial aid forms?
I'd probably contact the school and ask them, how they would like that information. It might require multiple sets of, supporting documents, but on the applications themselves, I'd try to combine information.
Yeah,
right.
Complex.
Yeah, Marie. Yeah,
I was just saying that's a complex situation, and yeah, it definitely reach out to the individual school. They have different.
Right. So I think students, we've been getting a lot of questions on eligibility or status and even these specific, family situations. I think that it'd be best to check with the university that you're applying to. As Marie and Gail have repeatedly said, that please contact the financial aid office or the admissions office for any such specific questions. We won't take them at this forum. Just one last thing, is there a resource out there for international students to calculate family contribution? Because I know the other citizens can use the net price calculator that's more suited to them. But is there anything that international students could use to calculate expected family contribution? Or how should they go about doing it if there's no tool?
I'm really not aware of great resources. I think there are some specific colleges that have tried to offer calculators on their website, but I'm not sure that is applicable beyond that institution. And that's what's challenging. So I would check in with the college to see if they have an option. I don't know if Marie has seen anything else, but I think that's a hard question.
Marie, do you know of any such resources?
Yeah,
Marie, your voice is breaking.
no, I wish there were. I do, but and I have not seen anything. The best suggestion that I have. The best suggestion I have, since there really isn't a net price calculator that is accurate for international students, is for a student to contact the admissions office. I receive emails all the time from students, and sometimes they'll say, hey, I can only afford $3,000 per year. Do you give a full ride or something like that? And I can easily tell them that, no, this is not an option at our university. And, depending on the questions they ask, if it's clear that, they can't afford Whitworth, I will try to make a suggestion for them if I have a little information about them, for, what options they may have or may not have. It's really, the best option is just to reach out to the admissions or financial aid office and, give a little information just to see if it's even, a possibility to attend that college or university. I mean, it's certainly not, we're not the equivalent of a net price calculator, but we can tell you that much as a student or family, whether this would be a potential fit or just completely, not a choice financially for you.
Right. And I think that's very good advice. A lot of parents and students are hesitant to contact universities about such things. And I think if there is a real question there, if you have a genuine sort of a doubt about this, please do contact the universities, and I'm sure they're happy to help. So I'm going to have to close the session. Unfortunately, we have actually done more than half an hour, I think 35 minutes of Q&A. So thank you, students, parents. I know a lot of these questions came from parents today. Thank you for joining us. And if we can answer some of those questions at a later, you can contact us through email. And we can also have a chat virtually or talk on the phone. Please do write into us. We did try to answer as many questions as possible and try to club some of them. With that, Gail and Marie, thank you so much. This was really, really insightful, even for us advisors. I've learned quite a few things today. So thank you so much for making the time, and have a good rest of the day. Aparna and Janet, thanks a lot for all your support. With that, I'm going to close the session. Thank you so much, everybody. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.